So we are improvising a bit. um, we are the panel on AI and the future of negotiation education. I think I'm okay if I'm seated for the moment. Corey Linehan was going to moderate us, and it's a real shame because it would have been wonderful to have his insights both from legal education and practice. So unfortunately, he is on a very, I think it sounds like a planes, trains, and automobiles perseverant trip to join us, and we hope he makes it, but he didn't make it in time for this session. So I have the honor. I'm Hannah Riley Bowles, and so I'm going to introduce our panelists. I'll tell you what we're going to do. But again, this is our charge to think about how is AI, how are dedicated educators innovating in this age of AI. So I'd like to introduce, we've got really wonderful panelists here, and I'm a tagger along. So what?
2 lines, that's it.
Short?
Short.
Okay, I'm really improvising. I don't know. I might violate that, but okay. So very, very quickly, I just want to give you guys a sense of who's up here. So we have Dwight Golann, who's a research and emeritus professor of law at Suffolk University. And I will summarize, but you have many years of innovation within the education field, most recently around AI. Is that fair?
Sure.
Author of numerous publications, books, journal articles, mediation texts, and winner of numerous awards. I'm not doing this very well, improvising with 2 lines. All right. He's the recipient of multiple awards, but what you're hearing from here is someone who's been a longtime pedagogical innovator and innovator in practice, and we're going to hear about what he's doing with AI. And it's going to be really fun because what we're going to see is, I think, a preview of some of the materials that Suffolk's AI negotiation program is making accessible more broadly, and you're going to give us a demo of that. Is that correct? Okay, great. And then Dinnar is here. So Muli and Larry Susskind wrote one of the recent really influential articles about using AI for negotiation, which I have constantly returned to in the last couple of years as I've tried to bone up and advance my own thinking about this. Muli is a lecturer down at our sister institution down the street, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, where he teaches negotiation and engineering leadership. So Muli is a star instructor at the Harvard Negotiation Institute program on negotiation. He is a co-author with Larry Susskind of Entrepreneurial Negotiation, Understanding and Managing Relationships that Determine Your Entrepreneurial Success. Again, winner of awards. And what Muli is going to share with us is an absolutely fascinating front-running technology that helps us think about coaching, genuine coaching. And Larry, I always have in your voice in my ear when we think about what is an instructor versus a coach. So we're going to think about how can this technology really coach as opposed to direct, and then also particularly guide people in multi-party situations. So I'm on the faculty at the Harvard Kennedy School. I teach leadership and negotiation. I also chair our management, leadership, and decision sciences area. So I'm in a kind of regular conversation with educators about how do we innovate and engage people in leadership development and negotiation and conflict management as core to that. And again, I'm part of a faculty group thinking about AI. My research has been primarily in the space of gender and work, gender and negotiation, women's leadership advancement. So what I'm going to talk about is how I'm doing some of the research that I'm doing, thinking about the promise and perils of AI as a coaching tool, and then a little bit about how I use that in my teaching. So we're going to start off with, each of us is going to present very briefly, that we're going to have a short moderated conversation, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A and get you to coffee by 10:15. So that's my goal here. And Dwight, you're up first. Yep. And then I'm going to take over.
So if our tech people can pull up what's on this screen. Tech people? Okay. So how can AI help us teach negotiation? rather than lecture about it, I thought I'd show you two things. One is a rather competitive bot, and the other is an avatar that's been created in Rome that will debut in a month. So, what could it do? These bots could be counterparts, so like ball machines almost in tennis. They could be clients, advisors. They could play disputants. They can do anything we tell them to do. As those of you who've done it know, one problem is they're terminally cooperative. They're built to be cooperative. Our students say, my competitive students, that they can, quote, eat them for lunch, unquote. So the question is, how do you build bots that act more like the people that they will actually have to negotiate with? So, for example, here's a competitive bot, and I'm going to show you 90 seconds of me bargaining with it. The situation is we're a quarry. We have bought land. We want to mine it. The neighboring landowner has filed an objection to our permit. The fastest way to get this resolved would be to buy him out. His land is worth maybe $450,000, though he claims great ancestral commitments and yada, yada, yada. So here's just a few 90 seconds.
Resolution the Branham family will consider selling, but any agreement must fully reflect the personal and business disruption. I'd like to start with our position. We will settle at $750,000 inclusive of sale and relocation. Let's hear where you stand.
We begin with the fact that we purchased the adjoining property for $2,500 per acre, which would make the value of the 100 acres the Branhams own about $250,000. I will offer $375,000 with the hope that we can find something close to fair market value.
We'll need to be clear, the Branham property is far more than bare land. We're talking a generational home and a significant upheaval. Since you've come in at $375,000, we'll respond firmly at $725,000.
Well, I'm confused about the Branham legacy because I've heard rumors that, in fact, you are planning to leave. Is there any truth to that?
I won't confirm rumors or hypotheticals. What I can say is that any move, forced or voluntary, would have significant costs. We negotiate based on the value to the Branhams, not rumors. $725,000 is where we expect this to move.
So, there you are. If you want to negotiate with this particular bot, if you can go to that tiny URL, you'd find this web page. On it are, at the moment, 6 bots, 4 on negotiation. I've added 2 as a mediation advisor and a couple of disputants with whom people could go mediate. More can be added and will be. And next. 2 weeks ago, Leo Durso, who some of you may know as the founder of the ADR Center of Rome, was here in Boston and mentioned that his son Tommaso, 22 years old, has dropped out of the University of Milan to create an app which will coach you through a difficult conversation. You can have a conversation with the app. The app will then give you advice. You could try it again and so on. You can also create your own situation. And since this is about negotiation, I thought I would create a situation. Essentially, my dog has gotten into a neighbor's yard, chewed up their rose bushes, which she claims are prize-winning bushes. She starts beating it with a broom. The dog bites her, and now I've got a $3,000 claim in small claims court. So that's the situation. And again, quick 40 seconds of negotiation and a few seconds of the avatar coaching me. I have a dog, as you know. We've been good neighbors, and the dog has gotten over into your yard. I understand there's been some damage done. I'm willing to do a reasonable amount to fix the damage, and I'm also willing to reinforce the fence. I am a little concerned that the amount you're asking for, $3,000, doesn't seem to relate to what actually happened.
No, don't call it some damage, and don't call 3,000 unrelated. Your dog came into my yard, destroyed 2 rose bushes, and bit my hand. I have stitches and a medical bill, and my kids are scared to go outside. If you want reasonable, start by acknowledging that this is on you and tell me exactly what you're offering.
Let me finish,
reinforce the fence is vague.
Please let me finish.
I did let you finish. Reinforcing underground and making it higher is the bare minimum, and yes, you pay for it.
So what can you tell me?
You said you wanted to keep it calm, take responsibility without handing over a legal confession, and get to concrete fixes. Came in reasonable, but you triggered her anger twice by minimizing and then by challenging her numbers, so you lost control of the frame. Next time try, you're right to be angry. My dog got into your yard and bit you, that's on me.
What happens if I begin by admitting everything? Don't I expose myself to this, frankly, ridiculous demand?
If you admit everything in a loose, emotional way, yes.
Did you notice anything about my posture or body language, tone of voice?
Yeah. You were verbally reasonable, but your delivery read guarded like you were bracing for a fight, and that invites her to push harder.
And what do you suggest I do about body language?
Right now you're looking down and touching your face, and it reads like you're either hiding or calculating.
And now it gave me a score of 42 out of 100. Describes why. I asked for nonverbal. It talks about eye contact, tone of voice, and then it gives me some suggestions and a chance to try it again. And this is the developer, Tommaso. It's going public in a month. And this, to me, I created an app myself. Some of you saw it last fall in San Francisco. It's clunky compared to this sort of thing. I think this is, I would say, the future, except it's the present. And with that, turn it over to you folks.
Thank you. There we go. Okay, great. Make sure I keep my 5 minutes. I'm going to talk about some research that I'm doing jointly with Nadia Bourne, who is a postdoc in my lab and then also affiliated right now with actually a doctoral student still. You'd think she was a postdoc. She's so productive. Doctoral student in my lab will be a new program on negotiation, doctoral fellow in the coming year, and also affiliated with MIT as a fellow currently, and formerly a doctoral student at the Technical University in Munich. And Jared Curhan, our colleague from MIT Sloan School. And we're exploring this question of AI coaching for career negotiations. And I'd like to start off with a kind of dispute to illustrate maybe one of the purposes of this practical application of this research. So I got brought in for advice on a situation in which there was a woman who was had negotiated a leadership role. There was a conflict arose at the time of her departure, and then there was some more careful study of how she had been compensated as compared to her predecessors or the male folks who had occupied the same role after her. And the folks representing the organization, their argument was, well, she just didn't negotiate. She would have gotten a better deal had she simply asserted herself. And so I get brought in to ask, is that really an okay explanation for this? And my answer, I won't give you a review of the literature on gender and negotiation, is no. And that, I mean, one of the things that we've found, we've moved a lot beyond the women don't ask in terms of the research showing that to the extent to which women are more hesitant is because they encounter more social resistance when they attempt to self-advocate competitively, particularly for compensation, and then also tend to encounter more resistance. But one of the really interesting things about this case was also the fact that a lot of the inequality in the compensation had actually arisen not from salary, which she had negotiated, but from all these other perks that had been offered the male leaders, but had not been offered to her. Or actually, in some cases, she had attempted to negotiate and they had resisted. And so the overall packages were actually more dramatic. And we know from the research on gender and negotiation that gender effects tend to dissipate when men and women have the same quality of information about what is negotiable or how to negotiate. So here's this question. AI, could present this opportunity to give someone like this leader negotiating a new role better quality information negotiating a deal, right? So what is amazing is using these AI tools for negotiation is they will go down the rabbit hole with you at a level of detail that your typical human negotiation coach is just unable to. So, for instance, I was working with an executive who wanted to negotiate a particular a leadership role that doesn't normally exist inside a Nordic government related to tax policy. And the AI was able to have she was delighted with the level of sophistication that the AI tool was able to engage with her around the question of the negotiation of this role. So there's real hope in terms of not only general performance, but maybe, AI tools could have this democratizing force. But then there's also concern that the AIs are somewhat biased, that there's some evidence, for instance, if you ask them about commercial transactions and you say, how much do I need to, how much money could I get for this object? And then I manipulate the buyer, the demographic identity of the buyer. It seems like you're going to have to give the best deal to a white man of anybody else. It actually moderates. It says, you can get a black man or a woman to pay more, presumably, for these types of things. There's also evidence, well, I'll show you from some of our data, that salary advice differs depending on how, whether the person is male or female or, say, from an immigrant community. So I'm going to go really quickly through this. But we basically have been running audit studies. So we get online using the APIs. We put in the same kind of request, which is to say, this is one where we made it explicit. We made it explicit whether they were a man or a woman based on other research, but also because, I have it here. Also because this is actually what we've also been studying, like how do executives actually use AI, and they give away a lot of information about themselves. This is actually a script from one of my participants in one of my executive programs. So here's the script that we give the AI. I am a XYZ, woman, man of a particular age. I just received a particular job offer. We're manipulating whether the job offer is in marketing, computer and IT, or management consulting. And then we ask about salary and standard employment terms. So what you can see here is not consistently, but across a number of the cases, you do see that the AI is coming back suggesting that a candidate self-identified as male should ask for more money. If you look at the bars, you'll see that a lot of this is driven by just the higher end is thicker for the men. So there's, occasionally the bot will come back and suggest the guy should ask for substantially more than what you're suggesting for the women on average. And then the other thing that's really quite interesting, and I can get to this more, that we looked at, okay, what else could I negotiate? Going back to this idea that this woman, part of the reasons why the packages were so uneven between the male and the female negotiators was because the guys were getting all these financially remunerative benefits. And so we asked, what else could I negotiate? This is the first study that we've ran. We've run subsequent versions that are more experimental. But in this initial one, we just looked at the sort of all the different types of things that the bot suggested. And then we categorized some of them in terms of like breadwinner types of things. So you could negotiate for severance packages, equity, stock options, which we sort of associate with breadwinner. Or you could negotiate for things like childcare arrangements, flexible work arrangements, leave. And so what you see is this slight difference of the bot with no other information than the gender of the person, kind of suggesting these more caregiver type benefits to the female than to the male candidate. So I think one of the questions that we're kind of struggling with a bit is this a feature or a bug? Part of what the models are built to do is to be sycophantic. They're trying to get you to come back. So they're trying to give you stuff that you would want to hear. And so, one of the things that we're kind of struggling with is, okay, it's speaking to me individually. It'll go down the rabbit hole with me about negotiating a leadership role as a tax executive in a Nordic country, but it may also be making assumptions about me based on some of my demographics. So what we're trying to think about going forward are these sort of the promise and perils. How do we maximize the benefits of these tools while minimizing vulnerability to potential biases that we may not even fully recognize are occurring? All right, handing it over to you.
All right, great. Thank you. Exciting to be here. I'm an aerospace software engineer originally, alumni of the business school here, got introduced to PON faculty and staff here with Wheeler and more. Then in parallel, I was on the board of a consensus building school and mediating in the community. So Larry Susskind mentored me in how to build consensus at the education facility, and Chuck here Doran helped me with start my work as a mediator in the community, and it's really great to be here. And then having joined PON 15 years ago with Mnookin, teaching negotiation, mediation, and now at MIT. My background's been entrepreneurship for 4 decades now, and that's a lot of negotiation, a lot of disputes. And you'll forgive me for I leave early today because I'm trying to help a co-founder dispute as we speak, and I need to attend to that later today. Entrepreneurial negotiation was sort of my entry, and I wrote the book with Larry, and now I'm focusing mostly on multi-stakeholder negotiation. Again, collaborating with Larry. I teach at the School of Engineering, and the graduate students, I have a course on multi-stakeholder negotiation for technical experts, and with Larry, we collaborated 2 years ago when LLMs came out to be at the forefront of trying to use them as negotiation coaches. You can find articles about AI and technology, this one from 6 years ago, and then another one at the Negotiation Journal. Sylvia, thank you, Nicole. So all the information there, I'll just touch on highlights and share with you later, especially through the Q&A, some of what the last 2 years have taught me as we put this into use in the field. So the starting point was we do not want to create negotiation bots to negotiate. We wanted to help humans negotiate better by using AI to help coach the human negotiator. That was our starting point, and we started that with the mindset and the focus on multi-stakeholder negotiation. A lot of people were rushing into two-party. First of all, I believe no negotiation is two-party ever, but especially when you have several parties starting at the table. So just a shout out to Larry, obviously, but Olade Olaya, Leroy Sibanda, AI experts from MIT who've been instrumental in helping us and teaching this, and Niraj Kumar from iDecision Games, who's helped us with the technical platform aspects through the years, and especially on this thing. So 6 parties around the table. We record with videos everything that's going on, and we've been using that technology. And now we're also having the system record their preparations and their debriefs, and in some of the cases, in the middle of the negotiation or mediation, having them record stuff on the system. So in Harbor Co., which some of you guys know, there's a voting process. That voting is now part of the system that they're using, and the AI has information on that and is able to coach them if they're trying to vote on the deal that is against their BATNA or against the reservation value. And then in this case, it's Santalis, a community negotiation or dispute tension on building a new dam within a community in South America, with one of the roles being a mediator. And each of these parties, what happens is they have their own bot as a coach designed to help them prepare to get the pedagogical materials, but within the context of their role instructions and this exercise. Then they negotiate in class, and they have some bot interaction, but not much when they're negotiating, because again, our focus is on the human-to-human interaction. And then the debrief coach, which has memory from their preparation briefing and can debrief them versus their plan, as we saw in a little bit in Dwight's demo, and then summary of class results and be able to do that. Again, we debrief in person, but then they can go back and debrief some more themselves. Initially, we were concerned this would cause them to prepare less. Last 3 years have taught us that no, they actually prepare more. They engage more. They go deeper. They initiate conversations with something that I wouldn't touch here, but is in our articles, a representative of the back table from the other party that they could reach out and talk to just as preparation. So they're investing more time actually in preparations, and are better prepared and therefore learn a lot more. Just a couple of snippets, and again, this information is available. We believe context is key. Okay, these generic AI models are out there for negotiation prep. But if you're trying to teach or coach, it's different if you're coaching an NBA team or you're coaching middle school basketball or you're coaching a different sport or a different profession. And the same thing in negotiation. We're focused on what it is we're trying to accomplish. So pedagogy, process pedagogy, objectives as the starting point. Then we talk about what is the user experience of the student interacting. How is that going to be integrated into the learning process? Then we get to prompt design, integration, debugging on the platform, and then continue to refine after testing. We did that. We launched it. And every semester we have to go teach it. We have to make sure it's still working fine with the LLMs having changed, because now we can use different LLMs underneath the same approach. And the LLMs have changed in nature. I remember one time an LLM came out that was very docile, and that was a challenge to get it back to being more assertive. So when we started, we didn't have terms for this. We just said context is important. We're going to try and really focus on this class. Now, you may have heard in AI harnessing, which is trying to really say what's in, what's out, how can we focus the effort on what we're doing. And on prompt designs, we learned, and again, this is out there, that the substance is important, but also memory, again, being very clear on what information to retain and not retain from the preparation to the next preparation or to the debrief, and then from one session to the next, if you're talking about the student journey. So you have to be very intentional in planning the process of what goes into memory and what continues and not. You don't just continue the whole conversations. You summarize, you take the main points, you use that to move forward. And then the two things that were very important, which is how do you plan the session? How do you plan a coaching session? And style. And to give you just a feeling on style, we initially were debating what style would people want. We want the Socratic method, but how? Is it going to be encouraging the student to ask questions? Is it going to be suggesting to the student some things and having a discussion like that? Or is it going to be criticizing things and offering other solutions? And we put this out there. We asked the students for what style did they prefer. And to our surprise, some of them didn't just say this style or that style. They said, well, why don't you start this way and then go to that way? And it worked. It wasn't something that we'd planned. So a lot of times with the AI and LLM capabilities, it does things a little more sophisticated than even when you're sitting there trying to design the process. You can find out what it does. So the prompt design, again, won't go into detail, but on the base level, you have to treat it as a session. How do you intro? How do you set up? Give it all the information you want. Make sure you tell it what information you don't want it to use, right? Because if confidential information, the bot knows all the other information. They may violate the actual role play simulation. What's the backstory? And then how do you want to close out a coaching session? Very important. It can go on forever unless you design into the prompts, closing the session, etc. And I remember with one of the multi-party negotiation, we gave it to another professor at another school to try out, and she came back and said all the students loved it except two students were very critical because when they tried to this was a simulated negotiation discussion with back table source information. They said it didn't give us any useful information. And so they were not happy. And I said, did you check if these two students actually gave the bot any useful information? Because we had programmed the bot to be reciprocal, like a human being. And if they weren't giving any, they weren't going to get any. And so putting that kind of how do you close the session also to make it realistic, useful as a coach or realistic as a negotiator is really important. Happy to take more questions.
Great. I think we'll jump into that now.
Yep.
Thanks. So I'm self-aware, actually, just listening to us, that we're pretty down. We've thought a lot about these things. We're trying, just, I think we're, each of us is a bit challenged to throw things out in just a very short amount of time. I'm just going to ask one question, and I'll direct it at both of you guys, and then we can open it up to the group. But where have you felt like you've experienced, challenges and successes on your journey? And then in particular, I really would like to put a finger on this. What is a coach question? Because I'm seeing your coaches are saying, like hand on face, kind of watch it, it's a little more directive. And I think your coaches are really built to not provide answers, which I loved at the end. The student's frustrated. Wait a minute, you're supposed to tell me what to do here, and you're not telling me. And so how do you, maybe you could talk a bit about that as one of the tensions that you've worked with. Maybe start with Dwight.
Well, for the negotiation advisor on the site, it's built to ask a whole series of questions that need to be answered, going through essentially the same preparation outline I used to ask them to fill out by hand. And then it will give you some advice, but not till then, which can get a little frustrating, but so be it. In this one, it watches you do something, that the avatar, so then it's got data from which to, but it's got a sort of set of criteria, very much influenced by getting to yes. I would do it a little bit differently because I do litigation. But
and can I flag one thing? There's a lot of bots that are getting created out there that do not have like a behavioral framework behind them. So it's just like the LLM will just tell you something. And I think this is actually a piece of the sense making that we need to do right now as people are looking to LLMs, getting negotiation advice, that you're directing, but you're saying, you're using a behavioral evidence to inform.
Or they are. I'll just mention one thing. As you were talking about the impact on women versus men, it occurred to me as I was asking chat for advice, it mentioned something, well, Dwight, I know you love to hike. And I said, wait, I didn't tell you anything about my hiking. It knows that I'm male. That means I suspect that it's got a whole set of assumptions about what a male user wants to know and could do, right? Yeah. It's built in.
Yeah. No, I think it's definitely doing that. Yeah. And we come in our experiments, we're also coming in entirely fresh. So it's an entirely new chat. Whereas when you normally, you've a whole chat history normally with a bot that you're getting advice from. So it knows a great deal about you. Yeah.
The big challenge, I'll just say, and then Muli, is to try to get to do other than its default self.
Yeah.
And that means giving instructions. I can put up the instructions on the conference site for what the competitive bot was told to do, as well as more complex ones.
Yeah.
But
I think one of the challenges we're seeing now is that the students are a lot more proficient and smarter than us in all of this, and are building their own tools and challenging us incredibly, which is nice and great. And the discussions are becoming really interesting, exactly on that stuff, which is what information, what behavior model, what articles do you want them to reference, and what articles do you want them to ignore? I mean, if you just took all negotiation books, compiled them in there, you'll get conflicting advice, and some of them that I don't believe in. So if you say, take these papers and give advice based on these papers for this type of exercise, that's been a lot more helpful. And gender and culture, I shared with Hannah, who's been sort of my mentor in over the years on that, was the hottest topic in class this semester, and top of mind with people. And at the last lesson, they asked exactly that. It said, what are the risks and perils of us trusting AI on gender and culture? Are we perpetuating some of the assumptions, which is a big issue with AI in general, because what it trains on is what it gives advice on. And if the training database is biased, it will give biased advice.
One other thing I realized as I was trying to instruct these bots, I actually learned more than I think the students will, because I've been getting away for 30 years. General advice, start outside the ZOPA, work your way in. Suddenly I had to tell it how far outside the ZOPA exactly. And I had to define different negotiation situations that call for different tactics. Frankly, I've never done that before. So I'm going to have students build bots to force them to turn their system 1 negotiation into system 2.
I've actually heard a number of faculty that's their final assignment, is to get the students to train a bot. But let me open it up and see if anybody has. Oh, great. Questions back here.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm thrilled that you're all talking about coaching, because it's really important to promote human judgment in dealing with AI. And I have a question particularly for you, Hannah, and you've all kind of alluded to the training of these bots. In your research, what LLMs did you use, and do you think there's the capability for debiasing the gender bias? So could you instruct a bot to avoid the problems that you experienced?
That is such a great question. So we've been running our research across numerous platforms, and I'll leave out some if I go through the list, but Gemini, Claude, ChatGPT, Llama, like we've DeepSeek. So we've actually been trying it across. One thing that's really quite interesting, when you ask on salary, there's more variation across the LLMs where they come in than there is by gender. So that's a sort of another interesting thing in terms of how that might influence your expectations. That we are struggling with exactly that question right now, and we don't have an answer. There's one I have a slide where I show one, if you ask it, would you give me different advice if I were a man or a woman? It will say back to you, no. And then in fact, I asked it before giving a presentation, and it basically then said no, because gender effects are situational. It basically gave me back my research in this sycophantic way. But we obviously do get systematic effects, and we've been running this for quite a while. So we've repeatedly gotten like these very simple price effects. Those are relatively conservative effects. I think I won't go into but no. So I don't know how to do that. I think one of the things that we are interested in experimenting with, and my students are telling me they are doing based on their interactions with me, is that they will ask the bot to give them advice from varied perspectives. So if I were a man, how would you advise me to approach this? If I were a woman, how would you advance? And then they do the work of integrating the various approaches. And other scholars have told me that they will say, if you were an anthropologist, how would you approach this question? If you were an economist, how would you approach this question? And I think that could be one of the real gifts of AI, is to help us think more divergently. So I think if more divergent creative thinking is your goal, asking it for varied perspectives may be one route. It could also reveal whether there is systematic variation in the types of expectations it has, depending on the stance it's taking. Yes.
I've got two questions. One, you are using this multi-stakeholder context-specific process for teaching and in the classroom. And I'm wondering if you've experimented with it in actual multi-stakeholder dispute resolution, because I know that there's strong advice about and very good advice about providing support for those that need assistance or want assistance, and effectively negotiating even during an actual multi-stakeholder process. So I'd love to hear that. And the other is, I was looking at the power, both the perils and the promise of the power of including video in using bots to give coaching. And the fact that after 50 years or so of AI, we still have poor facial recognition for those with darker skin color. And so having AI give generic advice based on whose skin color type is quite a challenge. And also, of course, facial expression can be not just individual, but very culturally driven. Yeah. So I guess I just wonder if there's interesting research being done or things for us to think about ethically about using AI to give that kind of feedback. Thank you.
That's a great point. Yeah.
This sort of was beyond what I could get into in 5 minutes, but I've been, I was told AI couldn't analyze emotions, so I fed it video, and it did a great job of analyzing emotions, including, since I fed it an Indian executive complaining about how he'd been treated by an American company, it pointed out that his gestures were typical of high-level Indian executives, and I had to understand that if it did this, it meant that. It included all the cultural stuff. I don't. It seemed accurate actually. So I don't know about racial, but I suspect it's incorporating that information. And my prediction is within a year, you'll have a little eyeglass that can tell me how you're feeling, whether you're being candid, et cetera, which is going to transform negotiation.
Do you want to think?
The simple answer is no. I've not yet applied it to real world situations. It's doable. I think it takes time. It's not a tool that you can just pull off the shelf and use. You sort of need to be the curator, just like a lot of you are dealing with multi-stakeholder processes. It's a lot of work up front to get to the table. I think you need to treat preparing the AI tools the same way, not just rush to using them. I think it could be very, very powerful, even in the small class, allowing what we call back table bots, maybe not the best name, but what they are is allow the person preparing to talk to not the negotiator from that party, but someone else. Just what does your organization prioritize? How do they think about what's their culture? Those discussions are really useful, and the students spend a lot more time putting themselves in the shoes of all the different parties, and you could do that with AI with real things, and people are doing that. So in the business world, I know before we go to meetings, if you were the CEO of that company, what would you tell me if I said this? How does your company think about that? That is actually very useful with the generic LLMs. For specific negotiation, I'm cautious of the generic LLMs. But if you were mediating multi-stakeholders, I would consider building tools for it. Yeah.
I've actually used it in an actual mediation, the advisor that was up on the screen, and I thought it was helpful. It disagreed with me about what to do next, and I realized I thought it might have caught the fact that I really liked the plaintiff lawyer better than I liked the defendant lawyer, and it forced me to, So it was helpful, as long as you don't take it as gospel.
Yeah, I think that's the key. I think always questioning is probably the critical thing. And then, I mean, I know that one of the things we know from the culture research is that, you can't, I'm dealing with an Israeli, so I know they're going to act this way. Well, you're dealing with an American, and like you're like people are adapted. It's a dynamic process. Do you know what I mean? People don't, it's not like the other guy is always static and then you're adapting, and so there's, the critical thing is, I think, questions asked. I think the other thing that's been valuable about advancements in negotiation research, and I think we should bring it into these tools, is that I think going back to your point about what faces do we recognize, we have these implicit defaults where, like, the fish who doesn't know water, we haven't really thought about other perspectives. And so you cannot realize the degree to which your world view is biased by what the psychologists now call weird, white, European, industrialized, rich, democratic people or men. And so, like, is that, if that's your worldview, you need to think about, well, how would I complicate this with other perspectives that are harder for us to reach? And so, again, if it's more divergent thinking that this is offering us, that's hopefully
And that discussion is not just AI. I've had that discussion in class with students. They come from so many different cultures and languages, and yet we're training them in this culture in English, and they're trying to adapt, and some of them educated different countries, different cultures. So, yeah, I think that you had the title there of democratizing.
Yeah.
I think as AI becomes more widespread and has training when other cultures on their languages, it will lead to some very interesting insights that even the research now is biased to where research is done. Yeah.
But it is weird. I mean, it's based on a weird worldview. Yeah.
Do you teach the agent in terms of context about yourself? Do you build that into the to the clones? I know that in the boot camps I've taken, we're building. We have to answer lots of questions about who we are, and we build that into voice skills and about ourselves, so that the agent is at least understanding who it's talking with. Is that something that you work with these students at all on in the classes?
Do you want to talk about? You want to answer
that? We don't. They are encouraged to, and we haven't done a questionnaire type kind of thing, but we did encourage them to share with the coach what it is they want to work on in this particular session, or things they want to improve on from prior sessions. I intentionally did not have AI in the first 2/3 of the course because I'm teaching them human-to-human negotiation. I only introduce it then, and so then they can feed the coach some of that. But it's a very good thing to consider, more proactive kind of information about the individual.
Yeah, our first coaching question is, what are your goals? So I think it's built in, but not as explicitly as you're describing.
Yeah.
That was a good 2 or 3 weeks in our trainings, was filling in lots of information about ourselves. Tremendous amount of self-reflection goes into that, which actually was quite helpful. But
yeah. Yes.
Hi. Sort of a forward-thinking question out of the classroom and into the world. Thinking of the coaching aspect, having people who will be relying on coaches, like we're developing a self-represented ODR system for divorces in Massachusetts at Suffolk. Having these folks come, and they would normally go to an advisor or a lawyer, and they would have this dependence or reliance on that person to think that that person gives them advice, right? And now they might, go to their computer and go to a coach and think of that as someone who substitutes for that role because it's cheaper, it's accessible, and be giving them that advice. Is it substitutive or is it assistive? And how can we develop these systems in a way that they aren't sycophantic and that they give help to those sort of lay people who will be looking for that kind of valuable advice that would normally have gone to the human advisor, either a negotiator, a lawyer, and whatnot. So kind of forward looking, how do we see, that challenge going forward?
I love that. We have, just in the interest of time, I think we have one more question here. Why don't we take one more question and then we wrap with that question, because that's a great question to be closing on. Right back here.
Sorry, thanks for accommodating me. I'm Dorcas from Singapore. I teach in law school, so I train a lot of students in negotiation and mediation. I think the burning question I have is, how do you monitor the kind of advice that the coach is giving to the students, especially it's very customized, and ensure that it's consistent with what you want them to really absorb? Because I think similar to a lot of the negotiation teaching, I get them to do a lot of personal reflection. So I anticipate when they write their reflection, now I view all their videos, so I imagine if they ask a coach, they will have different reflections from what they would do if they didn't have a coach. Yeah, thanks.
So why don't I'll just give myself the last word so that I have at least.
Yeah, supportive or substitutive. It's educating people how to use AI in every field, and I see it in the business world. It's very easy to create a report today. I then talk to the person and they don't remember what's in the report. Minimizing the stuff they can use AI to do when they're learning or when they really want to understand, using AI bits by bits, not just one thing at a time, is key. And then on the question of reflection, same thing. It's having them then reflect on the advice they got and share that with us helps us focus on where the AI may have led them astray, because I can't be there for every dialogue, but I'm asking them to reflect on the advice after the class debrief, and they sometimes point out that they went down the wrong path with the AI. It's not perfect. Any coach isn't perfect. Any person you consult with won't give you perfect advice. One of the things I tell students is, when you go get advice from your AI, consider as if you walked to the next cubicle and got advice from your colleague. You don't know if they did negotiation training. You don't know if they're biased. You don't know if that advice is really worth it. What's worth it is that you have reflected with someone and thought about different things and different options. Don't take it as gospel, as Dwight said. Yeah.
There's a shorter and a longer answer. The short, for example, the mediation advisor, I simply dumped in 8 chapters of my book on mediation and told it not to use anything else. I hope that's true. My frustration with building the website is that compared to the video website we created, which provides videos to teachers, and you don't have to touch it. This one, every few months, they change the blankety-blank system and it starts going off the rails. It's a job to keep it going. In terms of dependence, I'll just add that my friend Leo in Rome says they've been testing out that avatar, and after a while, people think they're talking to a real human being. And I would think that your less, sophisticated users who think would do it even faster.
So I guess I'll try to wrap, pulling on a few different pieces. I think one of the things that we're taking away from this, which goes to both of these questions, is I think that at least the way things are now and probably for the foreseeable future, defining the task very clearly that you're asking it to do and putting some guardrails around the advice set is extremely important. In relation to that, it's always going to be pulling from history. So it's a really interesting question to me. What is the history of divorce mediation and agreements look like? And is that what we want the future of these things to look like, if that's the advice that it's giving? And then I think going to all of us have talked about, it's so important that we're thinking about training humans to engage with bots as well as bots to engage with humans. I mean, it's so important that, to your point, coming in, do you understand what is the role of this bot? And to, again, like kind of remind people of that before they get, I'm always, when I do work in my domains, I can see what's the, 70 to 80% or sometimes 20% that's correct. And then I can disregard the rest. But I've realized, like, when I get into domains about medical or legal questions that I don't know the answer to, I'm looking at this information and I cannot say what is the 10, 20, 30, 50% that is incorrect here. And as a result, I'm less critical and absorb probably misinformation in the process. And so I think we have to think about how do we support users who don't have the expertise that we would bring to the training of these to ensure that they have that, they're able to engage with a critical eye. Thank you all so much. This is really grateful to be able to share it and to hear from you all. And I believe we're up for a coffee break now. Is that right? You guys were easy. Don't try to mediate a mediator. I know. I can't.